What was the incident at your workplace? One of the vending machines in work malfunctioned and set all the prices to zero. People formed an orderly queue to loot the F out of it. It was empty less than 15 minutes later. This reminds me of the time the Coast Guard chaplain on base Baltimore sent out a base-wide email saying he had a pallet of Girl Scout cookies and for everyone to come get some. A lot of people interpreted that email as free cookies. Come take as many as you like. He left his door open and left for lunch. While he was gone, his office got ransacked. People were grabbing armfuls of Girl Scout cookies and loading them into their trunks outside his building. It literally looked like when a department store or CVS get looted. When I was in my early 20s, I was working in a coffee shop, and my co-worker screamed at a toddler who just kind of meandered behind the bar. This child was a regular son. He was I think 3, and just sort of walking around and having a good time while the shop was essentially empty. He has no concept of where he can and can't be. I was walking over to just pick him up and laugh about it and hand him back to his mom, but my coworker lost her shit and grabbed him by the arm and started shouting at him into his face about how he can't come back behind the bar and he should know better and he was in so much trouble, etc., etc. She shakes the kid, lifts him up by just his arm, and shakes him more, and then just drops him. His mom comes over and grabs her son up. She starts screaming at her and is so angry she's in tears. So my co-worker starts screaming back. This kid is sobbing. I'm in shock. Cue social media shitstorm and lawsuit. She broke this kid's arm. I had to, unfortunately, actually give an official statement explaining what happened. One time, years ago, my boss didn't show up for work on a Monday morning. A few days went by, and he just never showed up. Never said anything to anyone, nothing. Turned out, he was heavily in debt, and over the weekend, he killed his wife, and then killed himself. Was in the army. The post sergeant major's daughter, 16 years old, got R in my barracks. Oddly enough, the multiple female soldiers who had said that they were R in the same barracks were warned by our command not to report, or even threatened that if they went to the MPs, that there would be consequences for them, the victims. But when the post sergeant major's daughter gets R, the safety of females in the barracks all of a sudden becomes a priority. My dad was a pararescue in the Air Force, their special ops. He said he loved his guys, but would occasionally hear horror stories from younger infantry guys in other branches, like Army and Marines. Since they were basically special ops medics, while being on standby for QRF, guys would come in to have them do checks like, "Oh, my feet hurt," etc., etc. Every once in a while, a guy would come in saying things that would suggest they were R. One Marine came forward to my dad's officer. They wanted to report it, but the Marine said no, as they were all brothers in arms, and it was just combat shit, plus he didn't want to make a scene. They still reported it, but he's not sure if anything became of it. This poor guy was basically brainwashed into this mentality of some tribalism esoteric shit. He told me this and a few other war stories, like his unit being left behind in Fallujah and Korgal, and reasons why they hate SEALs when I wanted to enlist. He doesn't regret it at all, but thinks people need to be truly aware of how it is before signing that paper. We're a waterside restaurant. We had a dead body float up one day, and we had to close. Edit for more info. The body came up a while before we opened, and luckily was seen before any customers got there. It was an OD, nothing malicious. We only closed for that day. Worked in HIV prevention at a large state health department. One of our secretaries sued for SH because we talked about sex and drug use at work, not ours, but our clients. I know a gynecologist that got flagged by IT for looking at anatomical images. Like, actual medical stuff, not in air quotes. Did she win anything? The state paid it off, cheaper than hiring one of the AG's attorneys, and with our conservative government, we didn't want that attention on our department. We had to start putting disclaimers in our department's job notices, must be willing to work in an environment with frank talk about sex and drug use. Before I was hired on, some guy blew his brains out in one of the 2 break room bathrooms. Of course, they had no interest in asking themselves why an employee would take the liberty of going to his place of work to kill himself. No contemplation that maybe it was the retail environment itself That made a man want to die. Nothing needs to change. They just installed a few columns of employee lockers over the door and surrounding wall, so nobody could ever set foot in the bathroom again. You can even still see the door if you crouch down and look under the lockers. Probably not the incident, but one memorable morning, rolling into work early for a meeting, to find the overnight janitor passed out on the floor in the meeting room with a half-eaten pizza and some illicit substances. Guy should have left a couple hours before. It was pretty funny. That is hilarious. Was he fired? The right thing to do is gently wake him up and not say anything to the bosses. As a union rep to a very large factory, after payday, anyone found drunk or hungover by a co-worker mysteriously had the flu and was either sent to the medical room to sleep it off, or their wife was called to come get them because they were suddenly ill. If someone was found drunk and on a piece of machinery, though, they'd get absolutely effed, and the whole book thrown at them. I work for a mail-order compounding pharmacy. We ship to almost every state and territory in the US, and have to follow the legal requirements for whatever state we're shipping to. Sometimes, this causes confusion, especially when it comes to controlled substances. A fellow pharmacist had an order that they weren't sure about, so they asked another pharmacist about it. The second pharmacist decided that they would pass it. The first pharmacist still wasn't sure, so she decided not to pass it and get more clarification from the doctor's office. This happens somewhat often, where someone decides to be safe rather than sorry. The second pharmacist did not like this. He said she was disrespecting him by not accepting his opinion, and wouldn't let it go. He ranted about her to just about anyone who would listen. It got bad enough that she went to the boss about it. Boss talked to him and thought everything was cool. Now, I did not see what happened next, but this is her story. She's coming in for work and walking towards the door when he pulls into the parking lot. Apparently, he revved his engine up and I guess sped toward her and acted like he was going to run her over, but stopped. He says he didn't do that. She went to the boss again, and he was let go. This doesn't surprise me. I'm a woman, and when I was a really young lawyer, I was one of a few lawyers assigned to a male paralegal, almost twice my age. He was fine with the young male lawyers, but the fact that he had to work for a woman, let alone a woman much younger than him, absolutely enraged this guy. I'm talking red-faced and seething with fury anytime I spoke to him. He finally got fired when he lost his shit and started screaming at me in the middle of the office because I overruled him on something. Some men lose their minds when women don't have to defer to them at work, and those men are dangerous. I work in a field that is female-dominated, but most management is male. I was interviewing for a new position a couple days ago with the person who would be my supervisor, who is a woman. One of her first questions was, "Do you have a problem working for and talking instructions from a woman?" I have a feeling there's some stories there. Worked in a pharmacy. One day it came out that the very friendly front-end clerk that knew everyone's names and one employee of the month a few times had been stealing medication for over a year. Mostly oxycodone and some other controlled medications. I find it peculiar that your oxycodone count was chronically wrong for over a year, and the DEA didn't do anything. Anytime a Schedule II medication count is off on audit, and theft is suspected, you're required to submit a DEA 106 form, and enough of them prompts an investigation. It's not something that just flies under the radar. Perhaps things used to be much more lenient. She was taking it out of the bottle after the pharmacist verified it, but before the patient picked it up. Wow, she really knew what she was doing. No wonder she got away with it for so long. We were working in a small custom door and millwork shop. I was the office and hardware gal, and we had 3 guys in office to do door sales. This one guy had a desk opposite of my office. I looked at his back, and he was constantly on the phone, doing sales. Well, the phone bill came in for the month, and there was something fishy about it. There were a lot of outbound 1-800 calls from his desk phone. This was before cell phones were common. I joked to my boss that it was probably a phone sex line, and he said, "Nobody would be that stupid." Yes, dear readers, he was that stupid. I called the number from my desk and put it on speaker. He was let go that day. Clarification: the call was toll-free for the first 30 seconds. After that, he'd be charged by the minute. They were hundreds of 30-second phone calls. That's what was fishy. Around 2008, right when I started working at a medical specialist's office, we had a nice, but kinda feisty gal, at the front desk. It's not unusual for them to be on the phone a large part of their day, doing appointment reminders, calling patients over to other places for referrals, etc. One day, she just wasn't there anymore. Come to find out, she was having her incarcerated boyfriend calling in from prison, which is a collect call. Given, it probably wasn't an eye-watering amount of money. It's just the stupidity of it all. This guy was coming into work drunk and falling asleep at his desk. 99% of people simply felt sorry for him, as he obviously had serious addiction problems. Not saying it's appropriate, but yeah, most people just left it. One lady would file HR complaints when it happened. I imagine they spoke to him and gave him a warning. On the third time, the lady marched up to HR and allegedly told them it wasn't good enough that it kept happening, so they made him leave the office on the spot. He woke up and smashed up all the monitors on his desk and started like going full Crash Bandicoot and wrecking everything in sight. Cops were called, they handcuffed him and escorted him out. Ironically, after that, we weren't allowed alcohol at staff parties anymore. We had a guy at my company, a shell of his former self. Heavy drinker, just couldn't show up when needed, was sent home drunk, in a cab, a couple of times. Given chance after chance and support, but at some point, you gotta let go. He was fired. He killed himself the following week. Awful. Co-worker's estranged husband walked in and stabbed her, and then someone pulled him off. We had passkey doors, but they were left open for convenience until after this happened. I am super vigilant about security doors at my current job. That's awful. Was she alright? She survived, as far as I know. I was out of the office when it happened, and found out about it via email. One of our night nurses would spend a lot of time in this male patient's room. He was in our facility for several weeks, taking a certain IV medication, so they wound up spending lots of time together. She left her husband once the patient was discharged. When she found out she was pregnant, she went back to her husband. They're still together. I used to work at Macca's, and one time, we had a girl cleaning above the deep frying vents with a cloth, lots of oil splashes up onto the stainless steel. Anyway, she dropped the cloth into the vat, and without thinking, reached in and grabbed it out. She deep fried her hand, and now has permanent scarring and nerve damage. Edit, for those wondering, the skin kind of fell off, like when a snake sheds, leaving raw red patches all over her hand. Oh, that's a wonderful edit. That shit will kill you, and few people realize it. There was a guy, a few years back, that was doing work on the fire suppression system, and fell into the fryers below. Got him from the waist down and he died. Absolutely terrifying, and no joke. Medical implant company, an osteoporotic bone filler product, was being tested. It wasn't having good success rate, so the project was cancelled, but the product manager continued to order it to be tested. When a few patients died, not necessarily from the bone filler, these were sick elderly patients, it was discovered that the product was still being tested. Of course this person was fired, and the company had to pay $23 million in fines. The story was much more complex than this post, but there are news stories. Heavier guy broke the toilet, and his tailbone, in process. Pipes busted, EMTs wading through toilet water, with the plumbers. Software company. Not a person there knew what to do. He didn't return to work. How in the world did he break a toilet? Was it one of those toilets that are just attached to the wall, with nothing underneath, that goes to the floor or something? As a fat guy, those damn things make me feel like I'm playing Russian roulette. Story time. I used one, just like this, at an airport lounge. I sat down, not a fat guy, but I am a grown-ass full-sized man, and felt it move a bit, but once settled things, felt pretty secure. As I'm doing my business, I suddenly feel lifted up. After thinking about this for a second, I realized, the shitters in the men's room are backed up against the women's room. The suspended toilets on each side must have been attached to one structural beam that supported a toilet on each end, and someone on the other side had just sat down. A shit teeter-totter, if you will. Someone came into the store with a Vaporeon plushie, asking if we could fix it up. There was a hole, and it had been through a lot. I just told the guy that I can't help him, and to look up YouTube videos. He got pissed at me, since we're supposed to repair bears, so, I told him, I knew what he did. Then he got embarrassed, and left. This was 25 years ago. Company had a very esoteric database, and needed a new admin. Took months to even find a single candidate. Gets hired and he and another colleague, get sent to HQ for some training. Uneventful. And then this new guy, accused our colleague of using, mind control spray, on him. What's amazing is this was just the start. He also threatened to erase the payroll database, the one he was the admin for, did some other shit I've forgotten, and was eventually fired, after one of the executive assistants. But only because, he refused to go to counseling. One day, two employees who were in a relationship, they have been together only about 6 months, didn't show up. It was unusual for this lady, to miss and especially, be a no-call, no-show. She worked there 20 plus years, the man only 4 months. There were attempts to call with no answers. Eventually, one other lady was able to get the woman to pick up the phone, and while she said she was okay, the tone in her voice told a different story. The sheriff was called to do a wellness check, and it was discovered he was forbidding her to leave. He was having a breakdown, and along with the insanity at their house, he fired off an resignation email to everyone at work, 25 people with emails, detailing his true thoughts of everyone, and airing out everyone's dirty laundry, affairs, drug habits, etc. The sheriff, eventually, got her away from him, but she went right back, the next day. About 2 weeks later, she quit her job, to move to another state with this guy. The chef, where I worked, asked me out, and I said yes, but the day of, I got sick, and called him. He went nuts, not believing me, and said, he was going to come to my house and get me. I called my manager to explain, and on Monday morning, HR was there, to fire him, and he got pissed off, and started throwing knives in the kitchen. Worked 12-hour, weekends, nights. The one weekend I had for vacation, someone tried to set fire to the building. The person who took my shifts was a part-time fireman, and an EMT. He had the fire out, in minutes, by himself. I'd have been freaking out. Edit, was a disgruntled fired employee, someone recognized his vehicle, driving away. Had a manager come in, wasted, the other managers there, got him to stay in the back, doing back stock. We were unloading a truck, and he got on a wave, essentially, an easy-to-use, forklift-type machine. He ended up driving the wave into a shelving unit in our back room, and the whole thing came down with tons of product. He crashed the wave into the floor, and landed on a pile of boxes, blood from him cutting his head. In the first hour of the shift, too. Everyone knew this guy had a massive problem, and this was essentially a cry for help. He was given an extra day off, and was back to work, the night after. Sad to see. That was about 10 years ago. From what I hear, he got sober, and quit the shithole place. Worked at a radio station. Sheriff shows up one morning, mid-morning, looking for the overnight guy. He had been caught in the parking lot of a local mall, in his car with an underage girl. Naturally, I gave the sheriff all his contact info, and began looking for a new overnight guy. I worked at Best Buy for a few years, about 25 years ago. There are several things that stick out in my mind. An employee made photocopies of paper US currency on a brand new, state-of-the-art color copier, and he was fired. A male employee told a female employee she had nice DSLs, and he was not fired. A female employee confronted a suspected shoplifter. The guy pushed her away and bolted, and a male employee took off after him, and tackled him in a store, and I believe he was either suspended or fired for doing so. The two employees are actually married today, the last I checked. I don't know if the shoplifter is married. During a particularly hot stretch of summer, one employee, who I believe was ex-military, and a little psycho, circulated a store-wide email, telling everyone about how to determine if they were hydrated enough by checking the color of their urine. Really not that bad, but considering who it was from, it kind of weirded everybody out. Another employee, who was the brother of the ops manager, sent out an email telling everybody he would kill them, like, if you keep doing this, I will kill you. Freaked everybody out. He said he was joking, and he got to keep his job. Probably because of who his sister was. A boyfriend and girlfriend, who were working in customer service together, got caught stealing a bunch of money, and were fired. A manager got caught stealing, and just vanished before he could get fired. An employee, who may or may not be writing this post on Reddit right now, got caught leaking DVD prices to the internet a couple weeks early, and had to assure some person from corporate that he was sorry, and would never do it again, in order to keep from losing his job. Edit, a couple more. A shapely, attractive female employee was hanging out with a male employee after work, and posed for some provocative photos for him. It didn't take long for the photos to get out, and for many of us to see what she looked like underneath her blue polo and khakis. One night after work, a male employee got in a fight with some other guy in the parking lot, and decided to fully disrobe. I'm not quite sure why, maybe it was an adrenaline thing. He was not shy about taking his clothes off. A few years later, he was a roadie for the Flaming Lips, and was pictured bare-assed in an article about them in Rolling Stone. The two that stick out in my mind. 1. I worked graveyard at Walmart. One night, I thought I saw smoke. Turned out, the garden center had stacked lawnmowers and the steel shelving too high, and the heater caught the cardboard on fire. 2. They had this annoying habit of teaching the newbies to stock with these handheld scanners. I despised them and knew how to do my job without them, and since I was fast and accurate, I was tasked with training the new people. I refused to teach them right off with the scanners. My reasoning being that if the system ever went down, they would be reliant on the scanners to find anything. Management wouldn't listen. One night, the lockers the scanners were kept in got jabbed, which meant no scanners were accessible. Everyone was freaking out. Except me. I skipped to my department and got to work, while everyone lost their goddamned minds. Employee A chased Employee B with a fire extinguisher because Employee B was being in a hole. Then Employee B ran through a door opening, grabbed a dirty old wet mop out of the mop bucket that everyone used as the public spitter, and swung it at Employee A, hitting him square in the face. Employee A, now dazed, pissed, and a little incoherent, decided to pull the pin on the extinguisher, and proceeded to extinguish the living shit out of Employee B. This all happened on night shift, and everyone agreed that this incident should stay quiet, for obvious reasons. Guy named James got pissed off at someone on the phone, lost his shit, and threw a fax machine. This was like 14 years ago, that almost hit an old lady. He didn't even make it 15 seconds after that, before they walked him out the door. They didn't even let him gather his stuff. 2 at the same job. 1. Guy couldn't help himself when reading Reddit or forum posts about a product we had launched. Responded to customers and got nasty. Management called him in and fired him. He threatened violence to the president, and some general threats. We had police posted for a few weeks. 2. One of our leads sent a funny email around about finishing some milestone with a pic of himself, thumbs pointed at his face, that said something like, "Who's done with milestone X?" This guy. Someone unintentionally replied all with the caption, "Who's got 2 thumbs and is gayer than Christmas?" This guy. This individual happened to, in fact, be gayer than Christmas, and didn't take kindly. I'm not sure of the consequences, but we had to sit through a few seminars. Small company, less than 20 people, manufacturing custom art pieces for home decor. This involved the CEO, who founded the company, and had the artistic vision, who I was pretty sure had undiagnosed bipolar. I'd notice over the years how he would swing between despondent, morose periods, and unnervingly manic ones. On one of his manic periods, he just started getting more and more unhinged. He had meetings with all of us about our dreams, and seemed to be concocting a master plan involving lots of projects, complete renovations of the workshop, all sorts of wild stuff. The business had been doing well, so we all figured he was just on a high and trying to keep up the momentum. It was fairly typical behavior for him. Then one day, he comes in, and it's scary. He has a framed photo of Richard Branson. He asks the IT guy to remove all electronics from his office, and it's done. He goes into the bathrooms and throws away all the soap and air fresheners. We then hear him screaming into his cell phone, in Spanish, to his wife, nearly incoherent with rage. He comes out and fires the production manager, and one of our workshop guys just doesn't want to see them anymore. He tells us that he's been awakened by an Epsom salt cleanse, and pushes the marketing guy to put the cleanse instructions on our company website. He's screaming and standing over him, so he has no chance but to comply and publish the batshit ramblings. Some police officers come in for a welfare check, apparently called in by his wife. They talk to him for a while, and then leave without doing anything. Apparently, since he wasn't a threat to anyone, or himself, they couldn't do anything. The CEO emerges and waves around the photo of Richard Branson, declaring him as savior, and that it's what convinced the police to leave. Eventually, he leaves for the day, and the other owner and the rest of the board are able to get him to stay away. The CEO never returns to work, and refuses to get help, which was a condition for his return. It all got sorted out, and the fired guys were back the next day, but sadly, the company was never the same, and never recovered over the next 5 years, especially once COVID hit. CEO divorced his wife, and started a new life with a new woman, several months after the incident, and had a kid. He seems to be doing well now, and I think he's getting some form of counseling, but I know he still struggles with his untreated mental illness.